So welcome, and hand over to you.
Well, thank you very much, and we're delighted to be invited to come and talk to you today. Abby come here, we've been involved with the excavation last year, and it's nice to be sort of spreading ourselves eastward a bit from the area we've been working in. It's our 20th year this year as well. We started Trussell in 2004, there's only two of us. And when we started, we very much wanted to work with community groups. That's why we left our well-paid permanent jobs, and decided to set up our own business. It didn't work out quite like that, but what we have done is a huge variety of projects and things. And one in particular, or one sort of thing in particular, is upland survey. And that's largely what we're going to be talking about today, the upland survey that we've done in the past. And it's based on work that we've done as part of the Royal Commission Uplands Initiative, which we started doing 15 years ago, 2009, and then more recently work for the Eland Links, the National Lottery Heritage funded project that has just come to an end in the Eland Valley. And it enabled us to explore, well, a large area of, do you want to do the next slide? I hope you can sort of see this. It's a little bit faint in this light. You can see the outline of Wales there, and you can see where the larger mountain ranges are. And all the little coloured blobs are places where we've done upland survey. So what that means is we've walked those hills with the aim of covering them as thoroughly as we can. The idea is that you sort of walk 15, 30 metres apart and walk over that landscape. If you've ever tried walking 15, 30 metres apart and keeping a straight line over an upland landscape, you'll know that isn't quite how it works, because there's the cliff or the bog or all the wild animals in the way. But it's that intention to cover to that intensity. And what you're looking for is any visible sign of archaeology that you can see. So earthworks, ruins of structures, things like that. We won't be seeing the stuff that's buried under the ground, that's not visible, that's just been completely covered. So we know that there'll be more than we found, even from that. The blue areas are the areas that we did funded by the Royal Commission, and I can't remember how many square kilometres were, but it's quite a lot. And I think we've recorded over 10,000 sites with that project. In any one of those areas, we usually at least doubled the known sites, and usually quadrupled. Because a lot of the areas people had never, it's not that nobody had ever been there before, and quite a lot of the sites that we found other people may have seen, but they hadn't been recorded. So the whole point was to make a record of them, and they are now available through looking at online resources such as Covline, which is the Royal Commission's online database. The pinky area is the bit that we undertook over the last 2 years as part of the Eland Links funded upland survey. It was quite a large area, 68 square kilometres, centred with the reservoirs in the middle. So if you know the Eland Valley, you've got the reservoirs that come down north-south and then go off to the west, and it was around that main north-south bit. But it went into areas we'd never seen before. Some of them had been covered before by upland survey, but they had been done 20 years ago or so. And the method we had of recording where things were has been refined since then. People were using GPS in its very early days. And at that point, GPS works by taking satellite readings, and it works out where you are. But in those days, the military still had a block on quite a lot of the satellites. So it said where you were, but it might be over there or whatever. And we'd identified this as a problem during the development of the Eland Links project, and this was an area that needed to be resurveyed because we could see things weren't there. The record says something's there, but actually it's 200 metres away over there. And we could see this is a problem. You can't manage what you don't know. If you think it's there, you manage that piece of ground. But if in practice it's over there, and that's where you've decided to do your tree planting, you know, it's not managed. And some of these features, they're sort of obvious to us after so many years of looking at them, so much experience, but they're not always obvious to somebody who's not looking for that. So it's important to know where things are to manage things. It's a little bit blurred.
Yeah, can we draw the curtains at the back, please? Sorry, they do
I don't think that's going to help, is it? I don't know why the door won't shut.
Yeah. The next one will be...
Anyway, this is an early 18th century map, 19th century map, sorry.
It's better.
That's a bit better, okay. And handily, it's the original surveyor's drawing.
Yeah.
Yeah. So early 19th century, and handily it's just about the area that we're interested in. And here we've put on main rivers, just highlighted them so you can see where things are, and highlighted some of the places that we'll know about and know where they are in location. So we've got Ryder, Llangurig at the top, Cymystwyth and Strata Florida. And this is sort of geared with the Ystwyth, the Elan, the Cladwyn and the Y. Just off the map would be the Towie, but that's starts slightly below that. But this defines this upland block that we've spent quite a lot of time looking at quite well. Do you want to?
I'd just add into that the relevance of Strata Florida here is that Rhyadr and Llangurig are properties of Strata Florida, as is that most of that upland block, of course, was controlled by the Abbey. So the links with Strata Florida are very important in that particular block of landscape. Okay.
And this just gives you the outline here. The solid darker line that goes all the way round is the outline of the Elan Valley estate. The Elan Valley estate comes out of the very late 19th century, early 20th century creation of the reservoirs. And this is the land that's within the watershed that feeds those reservoirs. So this is the boundary of the land where everything basically drains towards the reservoirs and not in any other direction. And it's the area of the land that needed to be controlled so that the reservoirs weren't polluted, etc., etc. And as many of you may know, and we've got some on the boards, this boundary is actually still seen in the landscape as it's defined by a whole series of concrete posts. They were put up in about 1913, and they go all the way around the boundary. Apart from the very top bit up in Ceredigion, where I think the farmer didn't like them. so they've disappeared. One or two are sinking in bogs, but by and large they're all still there. And then you can see the granges of Strata Florida, not the land necessarily, they own more land than this, but these are the granges. So these are the food production, wool production centres that the Abbey relies on. And you can see the coloured in there in the middle in red is the Cymdeithor Grange, which most of it falls in. But we have also then actually done work out in the Cymystwyth, Myfynydd and Penarth Granges as well.
And of course, the common to the south is actually run by the Abbey, even though it's not a grange.
Yeah, so our Gwesyn common is to the south there, and it's not a grange, but it was owned, is a property of Strata Florida. And you know, you start then to get an idea of the power that these monasteries had. We forget now that they did have power, they had land, and that they were the estates, basically. You didn't have landholder apart from the crown. These were the people who did it. So I don't know how many of you are familiar with the Elan Valley, whether you've just driven around it or whether you've actually got up onto the hills. Here we've got a view from the upland area, the very eastern part of the upland area looking towards Ryder. You can see in the common there. This is Dulymynach Reservoir, and looking eastwards very picturesque one, that one.
And Dolomana, the Monk's Meadow, of course, some of the place names remind us of the link with the Abbey.
And this is from the sort of northeastern block, looking down the hearts of the reservoirs. You've got these sort of fairly level tops, and then sort of quite craggy, precipitous valleys working their way through. That's where the Eland would have gone down.
Just to Pennegarrig, that is, isn't it?
Pennegarrig, yeah, I think. Similar sort of landscape, showing the flatter tops. You know, you're not talking about peaks and peaks and peaks. You're talking about getting up onto the upland and then the valleys wandering through in between. And that's a view looking down the Cymystwyth Valley. But I won't say any more. And that is...
Llyngungi? Llyngunnon. Oh, is it? Gungi.
Gungi. It is Llyngungi, isn't it?
Yeah.
Yeah. Particularly on the western side, you've got these small little lakes formed. So as you get towards Strata Florida, you've got the Tivy pools. This isn't one of the Tivy pools. This is further north. But these little lakes, mountain lakes, I don't think much lives in them, but they form quite a distinctive part of the western part of the area.
And it's fair to draw attention to the fact that we've walked all these landscapes in fine detail, you know, so they're difficult places to be. I think that, I hope these convey that.
Yeah, and a lot of it looks like that. And if any of you try to walk through that's purple moorgrass or Molinia. If any of you ever tried to walk through it, you know what it's like. It's very tussocky. The land disappears really, and when it's green, it just becomes a huge waving sea. It's quite picturesque, but if you want to walk through it, yeah, whatever. Find a sheep track. As you can see, you can start to get lost in this stuff. It does create big hummocks. It grows in a tussocks, so that you end up, you either have to walk on the tussock, which is great when it's boggy, although you fall off them. If it's a bit dry, you can walk on the ground in between, but you're getting into a maze. This stuff isn't brilliant for finding archaeology, as you can imagine, because it's been subsumed. And in fact, this Molinia, we've seen examples where it's actually eaten away earthwork banks. We can see an earthwork bank going in, but once it gets into Molinia, the way that it grows and these tussocks has sort of really reduced it and they disappear.
Worth mentioning that paleoenvironmental evidence from Molinia suggests that this stuff has really taken over since the Industrial Revolution, possibly to do with atmospheric pollution, but also the switch from grazing many different forms of animals, stock animals on the hills, to basically monoculture of sheep. That has impoverished the soils to the extent that the Molinia just has swept through like a, you know, taken over. And it's suffocating the landscape. It's a horrible thing.
And sheep don't touch it. They just turn their noses up. Obviously, one of the things it's quite famous for are the peat bogs up on Olenith, and there are definitely some living bogs up there, bogs that are still being formed and created. This is an area where it's dried out more, and there's quite a lot of work now to restore peat bogs and try and get them back to what they were. I mean, I think peat bogs do have a cycle. I think their lives come and go a bit. But you can see the depth of peat that's formed in some of these areas, and that's probably quite a shallow part, really. Peat cutting, of course, used to go on the hills, and there you can see examples of, you see the square rectangular cuts, the shapes there, and that's where the peat has been cut previously. You can spot these things usually, unless it's really degraded itself. And there we happened, we won't say where it is, but we happened across somebody who'd been cutting peat and leaving it in stacks to dry. And that's traditionally what they would have done. They'd have cut peat in these sort of rectangular, thin sections, and then stack them up to dry, and then you take them and store them like you would wood to burn later.
That was quite an emotional moment actually, because we'd never seen peat cut on the Welsh Hills, and you see photographs, black and white photographs of it being done in the old days. You know, you're not supposed to do it, but I was glad someone had, I gotta say. Lovely. Should we stop there?
What? No, go on. Yeah, next one.
What is it?
What? Oh, that one, sorry. Right, okay. Some of the best times to be out there are in the winter. When in the summer the vegetation grows. You've either got bracken, can't see anything. You've got Molinia, you can't see anything. Gorse, forget it, etc. But at winter, the landscape becomes something where you can actually start to see the ground surface more. You can actually start to see earthwork features that come out, and the snow quite often helps. It will go into, if you've got a nice ditch somewhere, it'll just define that ditch. But this is, and also when it's frozen, you can walk across bogs, which helps a lot when you're trying to cover a lot of landscape, because instead of having to go all the way around to get to somewhere, you can sort of walk across the middle of it. Yeah, there's snow. That's a part of a leat, post-medieval mine leat, with a little bridge put across it, stone bridge put across it to let the sheep across or whatever. Which is an interesting thing, because you sort of think, well, you know, you can hardly see the earthwork there for the leat. But to have to put a bridge across to get across it means that this was actually a nice little ditch cut, if you like, full of water, and they had to put this there to allow access across. I can't remember how far this lake went, miles.
It's about 15 kilometres, it's a big one. On the Ceredigion side, I can't remember the name of the mine.
It's not the Cwmeilan mine leat, it's a different one. But it just follows the contour.
Goes down to Fire Horse, down to that area. Yeah, it's massively.
And this was an interesting leat in that it's one where we don't quite understand what happened, but you get a bit of insight into how they built it, because we followed it all the way round, and then in one place there was an extra bit where they'd obviously started work and it was in the wrong place. So they'd done about 100 metres of it and stopped and abandoned that and gone slightly upslope then. So were they working in gangs, and that gang hadn't read the rules properly that day and started in the wrong place, or maybe whoever was the surveyor were marking it out hadn't quite got it right. But interesting little insights.
And again, you can see the Tivy pools in the background there. Again, all the images you're seeing are of landscapes that are within those monastic ranges. Okay, so I mean, I think it's fair to say that during the entire exercise, that was always in the back of our minds. What archaeology is here that links to the monastic period? It's a big question.
However, we're going to completely ignore that for the minute, because what came before that had nothing to do with monks. It's prehistory, so it's before written records. It's always difficult to think of it without the markers we have. You know, oh, it's near Ryder, oh, it's on the road, something road, or by the side of that. But you know, this is a landscape. They didn't have the same names. It didn't have the same connotations that we have. It's not like there's a village in Ryder or whatever. We don't quite know how these people are using this landscape. But we do have information that can help us. This is Gorslloyd Bog, which is just on the boundary between Ceredigion and Cwmystwyth Valley and the start of the Cwmeilan Valley, just towards it's the start of it really. There was a lake here previously, but that got blown away by glasses. So this is filled up then, and when you do peat samples of this, you can actually then start to look at layers within that and look at different pollen records within that. You can date the peat, depending how far down it goes. You can date it with radiocarbon dating, and then you can look at what pollens there are in that little layer of peat that you're looking at. And these sorts of things show us that after the glaciers, you started, scrub started to develop, then sort of pioneered trees came in. And at one point this would have been covered with trees. But then when people started to interact with the landscape, quite quickly they start to have an impact. And you start to find that those woodland trees start to disappear, and that you start to get more meadow type flowers and things. So by the time of the Bronze Age, you're actually looking at quite a lot of the landscape. It's going to be a little bit similar looking to what we've got now. There would have been trees in there, don't get me wrong, but they have actually had quite a big impact on things. Removing trees for land, for just views, for burning, for whatever. Just in the same way we use resources, it's just we can use things like digging huge holes in the ground. But they would have been using resources as well.
But I think the pollens from Gors Lloyd show that by the Iron Age, about 2,500 years ago, basically these hills were bare, were essentially upland grazing. So the tradition of pastoral farming here isn't a historical thing, it's a prehistoric tradition as well, which is quite an impressive thing. But
now, one of these landscapes, by and large, we don't see very much Mesolithic, although back on our display there, we've got one very small Mesolithic flake that we found during excavation at Llysteber Caethon. It wasn't from anything in particular, it was just in the upper layers of soil, but it was an indication of something. We haven't really got very much from the Neolithic. But when we get to the Bronze Age, so if we're looking about sort of 3,000 years ago, 3,500 years ago, we then start to get things that we can see and we can record. And these are the cairns, the burial cairns. These are burial landscapes where people have interred whoever they want to inter. We assume it's people they like or people they respected. There have been suggestions in the past that these are people who were being punished, and they were put up there as a reminder to everybody that you didn't break the laws. But I think it's probably more likely that they were put there for the people who were respected, liked, loved, etc. And often when you excavate around these things, you actually find a whole landscape buried underneath there with extra burials around, small other stone pavements, things like this that show that they were actually using these things rather than just literally, oh, I've shoved you in the hole and I've gone away again. So under each burial cairn you'll find a kist, probably, stone box, usually with cremations in. Say usually, there's always something that's going to not follow quite the trend. These are the Dragonvow cairns, and in fact what you actually see now are things post-med, these beehive shaped things. They're not the Bronze Age cairns, they've been rebuilt, and that's what you actually see on the landscape. But other sites, can't remember exactly, Bryn Dafydd.
That's on the Ceredigion side.
Oh, it's one on the Ceredigion side. I think that was the day we sort of half forgot about, because there was a huge thunderstorm. Not only did it start snowing, and we thought, oh, we'll just get inside. Somebody built a shelter on top of one cairn, and we thought, oh, we'll just sit down and wait for the snow to finish. And then a massive lightning flash. And we were like, oh my God. And we carry metal rods, so we were a little bit like, oh my God. But you get these big cairns. Quite often they've always got something more modern on the top. So you can see the little pimple on top is actually a more modern cairn, and the other cairn, the stone cairn underneath, is actually a lot lower and spread across a lot wider area. And these ones are high up in the landscape. They've got views, long views, that may or may not be important to them. Hard to know. There's a lot of theory that these things are because they can be seen from a long way away. They're meant to be seen. They're meant to be seen from one to another. we can have lots of theories about this. It's a little bit hard to prove because all you need is a big tree in the way and suddenly you can't see it between, and we can't know whether there was a big tree in the way or whatever, but useful to look at. Well, another cairn. Go on, next one.
I think the importance of that one is looking down the Elan Valley from the north, and the question on the site like that is there a significance to that view? You know, we can see the cairn from the valley, we can see the valley from the cairn, which is the more important view? I don't know.
But, you know, then you also have big cairns that aren't anywhere at all. This one hadn't been recorded at all until 2010 was it? Yeah, but Toby had recorded it.
No, in 2010.
Oh, okay, right, okay. In 2010, it was spotted on an aerial photograph. But because of its location, nobody really ever goes there. It's quite difficult to get to. You can see where the car's parked in the lay-by there. You can't see it from the car park. You can't really even see the flat shelf it's on. What it has got, though, is an amazing view down the Cwmystwyth Valley. Was this important? We've got evidence of Bronze Age mining going on in Cwmystwyth. Was this something where they could look up to it and say, oh, you know, you can see it from down there? And it's not just the one big cairn. All around that are small satellite stone cairns as well. But when we think about cairns and we think of them up on the top of the mountains, and they're not always. These big ones here, why they're there. And this one, again, it's sort of actually tucked away. This one's a more intricate thing and it gives us a clue there's something else going on there. I'm stood on a ring cairn, but in the foreground you can see these upright stones that seem to be part of it.
There's one just at the right-hand corner. There's an arc of stones around it. Yeah, but it's completely invisible in the landscape. It's the point. It's hidden. It's completely hidden.
It seems to have some meaning, but who needed to see it or whatever? These are things where they throw some of these other things out of.
Sorry, just.
Excuse me.
Yes, sir.
In the last three that you've shown us, there's a lot of stone that's been. Well, I don't know whether it's been excavated.
That's actually, like there, that is actually how it is now. It's not been excavated. It is actually a stone cairn, because you've got these, when you build the cairn, Bronze Age people built the cairn, they dig a hole to put a stone box in, put the burial in that, and then put stones on top of that. So this is the remains of what the Bronze Age people did. It hasn't been excavated, it hasn't been disturbed. It's just that there's such a quantity of stone there that the grass hasn't grown over it. Some of them are grassed over because they're smaller and the grass has managed, the turf has managed to creep in.
Such as that one.
Like this one here, you can see there, I can't point, but you can see there that there's, where I'm standing in front of me, there's a green grassy bit. That's actually stony, but it's covered in grass. Okay, but it's just a slightly smaller monument, so the grass has managed to get in, or maybe earth has blown more onto that site. Does that answer the question?
Yeah. But in an area where there isn't a lot of available stone, they would have built an earthen mound. You know, Aberedu Common would be a good example, where there's not much native stone. So the cairns, the barrows as we call them, are built of earth rather than stone. Which I think is,
right. Kind of, and one thing we discovered during this most recent survey is this round barrow, really. So you can see me, and then you can see this mound.
Huge.
It's quite large. This hadn't been recorded before, and we believe this to be a round barrow. So same thing, like Paul was saying. It's a burial mound, but it's mainly composed of earth, or at least it's got an earth cover on it. There was stone visible in the top, and you know, without excavation we can't know about it further. But it's quite amazing these things are still there to be discovered. You know, of this size, you'd sort of think that, gosh, you know, everything, but not everything's been discovered by a long way.
The hill in the background, the Elan Valley is just below the hill in the background in that shot, and I can see the top of the tower and Pennegarring Dam actually, my eye of faith. So it's hidden in plain sight, but no one had walked the land, and nobody had ever spotted it. So.
Right. I would just say on someone in terms of Bronze Age people, we know where they buried people, by and large. We've obviously not got all of them, but we can record a lot of them. What we don't really know is where they lived a lot of the time. Very rarely do we come across things, and it's usually through excavation. Something is actually hidden, you won't actually find it. We didn't also in this whole area find very much evidence for the Iron Age, and very little evidence for Romans, apart from one transitory marching camp. So we didn't, there's sort of a gap there. And you want to pick up on that now?
Yeah. Okay, right. Well, okay. So this is a bit of a slideshow coming up. Jenny's given a bit of a background of the landscape and the earlier sort of human interactions with this landscape, okay? Now, the really difficult bit is this next. So as Jenny said, there's this big gap there, Iron Age, Roman, early medieval, there's very little we know. In terms of early medieval, we know Llansanfraid Cwm Daiddwr Church, Llansanfraid, Saint Fried, Celtic saint. Maybe there's a church there with early medieval origins, as in post-Roman, 5th, 6th, 7th century. Near the Elan Valley Hotel was the site of Llanfadog. There was a church there, Llanfadog, Saint Madog, another Celtic saint. There may have been a pre-Norman, 5th, 6th century church there. That's possible. So there's little hints maybe that tell us that there was still a society, there's the Bronze Age, or these prehistoric people lived and interacted with the hills. Undoubtedly that carried on through the Romano-British period and into the early medieval period, or the Age of the Saints, the early Christian period. We have no doubt that there were communities in the hills, but just archaeologically finding them is a bit of a challenge as it stands. And we may never have answers to some of those questions. But the medieval, things change. We come into the historic period, so we start getting documentation, we start getting names and eyewitness accounts and so forth. But the problem with that is we get increasingly more of it, because now we get into the historic period, and I must say this, we're archaeologists, we're not historians. We dabble with history, but as field archaeologists, our approach is completely different. Our thought processes are completely different. So that may become evident as we go along, because we're the ultimate doubting Thomases, really. If we can't touch it and feel it, then it doesn't exist, And the fact that it's in a book doesn't mean anything to us. It's just a story. We need the evidence. There we go. Right. So, the one thing we feel that we can guarantee about pretty much everyone in this room and in this region is they know about the Monk's Trot. Okay? And this is where we immediately start diverging from the historians, because we don't believe it. Okay? As field archaeologists, we've walked it, we've recorded it, we've analysed it, and we disagree with the suggestion this was a road built by the monks of Strata Florida. There is no evidence for that, okay? Hard evidence. Doesn't mean to say that the monks didn't walk that way, but there is a theory, there's been a publication indeed that claims this was constructed by the Lord Rhys actually to move his armies to face the Anglo-Normans on the eastern border. And you have to ask yourself a question, why would a Welsh prince hidden in the hills in the west build a road to the Normans in the east so that they could just race straight down into the heart of his kingdom? It doesn't make sense. But anyway, we've spent some time. It's a fascinating piece of history, of archaeology actually. It's a fascinating piece of history. And it really, if you can get up there, it's worth the walk. It's a long walk and it's a challenging walk. But what we've realised doing our expansive field work is, it's just one track that crosses those hills. There are actually quite a few of them, and they're really interesting. And it isn't the best one, actually. But one of the things that people say about it is it's got a metalled road surface, okay? But it hasn't. It's got boulder clay over the entire landscape. If sheep walk along the surface, that's the effect you get. The clay dissolves and the stone is left. Okay, farmers cut tracks for JCBs in these hills, and within a few years it looks like that. It's just a natural process. It's natural erosion of the boulder clay that leaves you with like a stony surface. It's not a constructed roadway. It's just a thing. It's in a poor condition in some places, and that particular day I actually thought I broke my ankle. I had a 2-mile walk back to Clyde when I'm limping along, and that was the state of the road. It didn't much help that day. It's still, it's quite contentious in the modern period because people want to use it for all sorts of different things, and there's some of the results of its use. Yeah, next one. But this is a bit faint, but I mean you can just about see the red line. This is the old map, the 1815, 1820 Ordnance Survey map. You can just about, I've marked out the red line there. Unfortunately it's not very bright today, so we'll skip that for a second. But the point I wanted to make with this, going back to the earlier map that we had, those are the main rivers, okay? You've got Strata Florida over to the corner, the lower left. You've got Rhyadr to the right, so you've got Llangurig to the top and Cwmystwyth as well. Now those are all key parts. I mean, Abercwmbir, of course, is a further flung relative of Strata Florida beyond east of Rhyadr, okay? So from our point of view, we're just surveying these hills, we're not hugely interested in it. Other than the claim that the Monk's Trod was a way that you went from Strata Florida to Abercwmbir. It was the road, okay? The problem we have with analysing the landscape is it doesn't make sense as to why you choose that route. Because if you're in Strata Florida, there's a really easy track due east to the Clydwen, which takes you to Rhyadr, which is owned by the Abbey. And I suspect it'd be easier to get to Abercwmbir from Rhyadr, and safer indeed in medieval times, than taking this really odd track over the top of the highest ground and then dropping down to the Elan, and then taking this strange diversion to an even more challenging valley that takes you down to Narnerth and crosses the Wye and goes from narrow valley. That just seems like a really odd way to go to Abercwmbir in medieval times. I'll come to a bit more about that now. And what we noticed when we walked the Trod is it fords the Elan, and you can see the black line, sorry I should say, is the Trod. It forks at the end, I'll come to that in a second. But when it forks, where it fords the Elan, the other side of the Elan is a place called Aberhenllan. There's nothing there, it's just a place name. So Henllan, the old church. Well, what was that? And, archaeologically, Aberhenllan looks interesting. There's lots of things going on there, but we don't understand them because it's covered in long grass and millennia and stuff. But if you go through Aberhenllan, there's a valley goes straight north, and you go that north, you're heading to Llangurig. To our eyes, the Monk's Trod seems to be heading you from Strata Florida to Llangurig, not to Abercwmbir. But that's our opinion. We're very opinionated as archaeologists, but it makes sense, okay? The other end of it, I would say John Ogilvie did his road map, late 17th century, and he marks what we now call the Monk's Trod on his map, where it gets to the Elan, and he annotates it as the Drover's Road to Fairhos, or to Rhos Fair, as he calls it, okay? So in the 17th century, it was a droving route. Not to Strata Florida, but to Fairhos. Now, in fairness, we do know that if you follow it to Fairhos, before you get there are many opportunities to fork off and go to Strata Florida. So we wouldn't say I can quite conceive that the monks did walk that way, or not the monks, or the people in the medieval period may well have used that route. But we really do have to disassociate from any idea that it was the road that was built from Strata Florida to Abercwmbir. It's much more complicated. And the other red lines you can see are routes that we know existed in medieval times, or that we know can be seen in the landscape today. And they're actually marked on that 1820-ish map. The Ordnance Survey actually do mark them on as roads that were in use at that time. They've gone out of use, but the ones down the Clydwen are particularly interesting, and sadly most of them are now under the reservoir. But there's a point in the Clydwen where traditionally it's said there were inscribed Christian stones. So was there another church there? We've lost that under the reservoirs, unfortunately. But one in particular we were fascinated in, where I've got Clydwen written on the map there, that road follows the Clydwen goes up to Cloudwen Farm, but then goes up, follows on up to the direction of Clydesy, really, and that survives really well. There's another one to the south that runs south of Llyngunnon, which we'll see in a moment, which is, I think that's the one. It's a really nicely constructed road. It's far better than the Monk's Trod, actually, and that we suggest is the main road to Rhyadr, and hence, to my mind, the main road to Abercombe here. But, you know, and that is that road running sort of, I think Llyngunnon is possibly just about visible, top left, a little glimmer of it. I'm not sure what's there. But you can see Jenny standing on it just sort of left of centre. I went up the top hill, there's often have to take a photograph. But that is actually a nicely built road, a nicely built roadway. It's cut very neatly into the surface. So, you know, we'd make a case that there's a lot of thought needs to go into to where the monks, I say the monks, but the people in the monastic period then, how they negotiated their way around these hills. And then we'll come, that's one thing, that's kind of a framework as how people got around, okay? But within that landscape, again, as archaeologists, when we're out there thinking, okay, what are we going to find here that relates to that period, the activity, whatever, however people crossed those hills, what were they doing when they were there? And what have they left behind? And that's a massive question, and it dawns on me as I've been doing this, you know, we've come to the end of the initial fieldwork phase after 15 years. You're going to need another 15 years to start unpicking what it all means, I suspect. But the archaeology is there, and it's really important things, and the things that you kind of have to take my word for it today. I'm afraid I haven't got time to document this all, but there's things we've learned about the different types of archaeology that you'll find in that landscape, because you have to remember when the monastic granges existed, when the monks owned these hills in the 13th, 14th, 15th centuries up until the dissolution at the start of the 16th century. These lands were very often were managed to Welsh custom, to Welsh law, okay? And the so-called Hafod Hendris system would have been in full-blown in all its glory. You would have had lowland farmsteads, whether they were monastic or not. You would have upland Hafods, or I'm not going to dwell too long on interpreting that word, but places in the hills that were used during the summer, where a proportion of the community, the farming community, would go to the hills. The herdsmen would be there with the cattle, the geese, the sheep, horses, whatever animals they cared to have, and would spend the summer months there in their huts, in their havotai, in their summer houses. Okay, so that's a world we're dealing with, very different to everything that followed the medieval period, because that all changed after the dissolution of the abbeys, which coincidentally, it came in with Henry VIII too. There's lots of changes to law and to custom, the Act of Union, which abolished Welsh law. So systems changed. Okay, there's a massive change happens in Tudor times. So we've got to now unpick. We've got to make sense of the archaeology, right? This is it's confusing, but we'll try. So we're going to start with platforms. I'm trying to simplify as much as I can. Now, platforms we find, and the Cwm Ffwrn is a blinking great example of a platform. And if anyone's been there, this is a textbook example of what I'm talking about. I'll come back to it in a little while, but. If you haven't been there, a platform is a really simple thing. We still make platforms today to build houses, as they did in medieval times. All you do, you have a nice bit of sloping ground. It doesn't matter how steep the slope is, it can be relatively gentle slope. And you just cut in a notch at the top, you draw the earth forward and build a lump to level it off, then you've got a level platform and you can build your house on it. Okay? And it ends up with that. And it's as simple as that. As field archaeologists, we call the top bit the fan, the flat bit the platform, and the bottom bit the apron. I don't know why we use those terms, but we use them. These are really important in this landscape because there's no structure on. So if you look from the end, if you're at the bottom end, you look up, that's what you get. The apron would be facing you with a flat platform above it. The bottom end rises up, is prominent. The top end is cut into the slope, into the ground, and that's where the fan forms its upper end, and the platform is below it. But you see, what you'll normally find with the platform in any situation, it's just a grassy earthwork feature. There's no building on it because the building was built of timber. It was a timber house. Now, to have a timber house, you need wood. We know that by the 16th century, the wood was gone from these areas because John Leyland visited on behalf of King Henry VIII around 1536, 1537, went to Strata, Florida, was taken through these hills, went to Cwmystwyth and noted that all the last of the timber had gone because they'd used it smelting lead and the goats had eaten the rest. Okay? So if you've got timber houses, to get timber houses, you don't need some twigs, you need proper timber, you need strong structural beams, you know. You need woodland. So we must suppose that these date to before the 16th century. So these are the sites where people were building houses during that monastic period, okay? And we know from excavations in other parts of Wales, if you excavate them and date them through pottery or radiocarbon dating, commonly 12th, 13th, 14th century, okay? So now these places, to be honest with you, hardly any of them had been noticed until 2022 when we started finding them in areas that had previously been surveyed, but people hadn't seen them. They're not obvious. That looks obvious because I've got myself in a position to take a photograph, okay? That first one is just next to this other one. They often occur in pairs. That's a nice house platform. To the untrained eye, you wouldn't really see it. Or if the sun was shining in a different direction, you might not see it. If there was bracken on it, you might not see it. Now, this is going to be challenging for me. But could you just go back to that photo for a second, sorry, Jen? In the background, behind Jenny, there's lots of bracken on the facing slope. This is, in the top there, in the top right, you can see the upper reservoir in the Elan Valley. Hirnhunt Farm is, I think, is where the trees are above middle centre. The bank immediately above Jenny's head is covered in bracken, okay? And we did walk through that. We thought it looked suspicious. There are lines through it. And we spent a lot of time trundling to that bracken, found nothing. Go to the next. Now, this is going to be challenging because it's a little bit... Let me shut this if I can. Sorry. I don't know whether that helps or not. Shut. Okay.
The steps are...
No, don't worry. I'll manage. But anyway, so if I lay down... and put my finger, the ones I photographed are just sort of, oh gosh, I can't do it. Just beyond my finger, I can't even do that. If you go, you can see the river going through the middle, there's a stream going through the middle. Below it, sort of just right of centre, there are two dark blotches. Those where those two platforms are, okay? If you look above the stream, on the darker slope is where that bracken is, okay? Now then, whether I can point to this, I should have had a biro to this, just there, you can see that sort of square, that rectangle. There's 1, 2, 3 rectangles, a large one and 2 sort of to the south, below it. There are 3 platforms in that bracken. We didn't find them. We walked. We suspected there was something there. We couldn't find them because there was too much vegetation. Okay, but the LiDAR shows us there are actually 5 platforms there. Now, 5 platforms isn't just a house. It's a community. Okay, so now you're looking potentially at an upland, medieval upland. Havod, as in a group of huts or houses where people spent the summer tending the stock. That's a fabulous discovery, it really is. And it's typical of what we expect in upland landscapes. But in this context, it's in the monastic Grange, it's in the Grange of Cwmdaiddwr. So we may well be looking at one of these upland settlements where the tenants or the herdsmen of the monastic Grange actually went for the spend their summer. There are further platforms up the valley I would add, but we haven't got time for that. I mean, this is a lovely platform, one of a pair again, just behind Jenny here. There's the Ystwyth Valley down in the dip, there's the upper Ystwyth River. The main road, just as you approach, go up the top of the Ystwyth, just before you get to the county boundary, you've got these 2 massive earthwork platforms, okay? So again, 2 massive medieval houses. This would be probably in the Grange of Cwmystwyth, actually. So these, again, nobody's ever noticed. It's right next to the main road, and people drive past it every day, but they don't get noticed unless you get out of the car and have a good walk, really. This one is helped by the fact that it's quite wet, so the reeds have grown on it, so you can see its shape really nicely. How it's cut in, and Jenny's standing at the bottom end of it. Next one, this is just not far from Carbon Cork Reservoir. The hill at the back is Cnwch, which is just above the Elan Valley Visitor Centre. This is to the, whatever side is it, south, I'm not sure. Yeah. That's Pantagwaith. Those are familiar with the area. The trees in the background, the site of the former cottage of Pantagwaith. And just facing it, and we'd spent a few days on Cnwch and rattling around that bit of hill, with the bracken's dead, as you can see. And we noticed this huge platform as we passed it, which Jenny's again standing at the end of it. I think, how big was that? 30 metres long? Yeah. It's a massive earthwork. There was a massive structure on that. So you're looking at a medieval house site. And around Pantagwaith and the adjacent bits of hill, we found 3 or 4 others, okay? So again, we're looking at places that would have been lived in during the monastic period. And this is one of my favourite ones. Can you see the platform? This is how difficult it can be sometimes. Oh gosh. What I will tell you is that the houses top left there, the one in the background is Llanech y Cawr, which is the 15th century highly listed, protected farmhouse at Dol y Mynach, the Monk's Meadow in the Clyrwen Valley. Now, what we noticed as we walked past, going on our forages up the hills, you won't see it, my finger comes, will it work? In the middle of that field there's a dark patch, yeah? That's a lovely platform, but it's not obvious because it's a very gentle slope. There's a beautiful platform, you can barely see it on the LiDAR. Oh gosh, I'm not good at this. In the middle of that field there, that darkish patch is the platform, okay? And there was actually another one in the adjacent field. So these things are like dotted around this landscape, and this is the pay dirt. This is the medieval landscape. Elements of this medieval landscape starting to show up for us. Next jump. This is, oh gosh, this now would be over northeast. What do we call it? Pantallyn, yeah. So we're going the northeastern part of the Elan estate. 2 nice earthwork enclosures there, and between them is a huge platform. And actually, I haven't got time to analyse that with you, but you can see there's that oval enclosure south below that. There's another platform. There's one off to the other side as well. I think there were 4 or 5 platforms. Another group of platforms with 2 nice enclosures. So again, is it a havod? And are the enclosures for cattle, for stock? We'll come back to those. That's it on the ground. You know, the platform is buried in bracken. You can see it in the winter. You wouldn't see it in the summer. You just would have no chance. Even in the winter, it took us about half an hour before we realised it was there. So you know, these are amazing things to see. This is. Keep going, Jim. Sorry. You know, so these platforms, if we had an endless budget to go and excavate, that's where I'd start, because that's the likelihood is that's where you're going to find the medieval occupation. Okay. Now then, so we deal with those, right? Now let's go on to the next thing, which is longhouses. Okay. This will make sense eventually. Now, a longhouse is a strange thing. Again, I could give a lecture on them, but the simple thing about a longhouse is it's the traditional Welsh longhouse, as they describe it. It's composed of 2 parts. It's got a living space for humans, and attached to it at the bottom end is a space for animals. Is a cow house or a sheep house, whatever you want, whatever type of stock you want to put in. And this is a great example from Iorwerth Pete's book on the Welsh house. Llaethdy, Great Mains, Llaethdy Radnorshire. So you can see the one end is just it's a stone building, okay. To the right side you've got a living room with wooden partitions creating a bedroom and a dairy. The other end, beyond the stone wall, you've got another cell, another compartment divided with wooden partitions to be a cow house and a barn. Essentially, that's what a longhouse would be. Now, we'll see them as farm buildings, you know, a farmhouse with a byre in the modern landscape. But in archaeological terms, you go back now to, in this landscape, you see what I call the skeletons of medieval longhouses. Now, these are houses that are built with stone, not with timber. Now, the significance of that I'm not 100% certain of. It could be that some areas stone is more readily available, so they've used it. Better stone is available, so they've used it. But I have seen, for example, a letter, late 1500s, a letter in Killarcombe in Carmarthenshire from a tenant to the lady of the manor, asking, can I please build my new house in stone because there is no timber left in the parish. Okay, so it could be that it's showing us these were built after the timber had disappeared by the 16th century. Without excavation, I can't we can't know. To just go back one thing, sorry. But you can see that, a substantial house divided into compartments. That's a great landscape. A great example, Clywren Dam is in the background. These things are under our noses, really. I don't know whether I circled there. You can just about see that long thing on LiDAR. It's actually 3 compartments, this one. And just sort of to the southwest of it, you can see there's another long hut there as well, which may be associated with it. But this isn't a group of platforms now. This is maybe a farmhouse with an outbuilding. This may be something different. We may be looking at a different tradition here. We may actually be looking at something that's post-monastic. We can't be certain of that, but that would be a guess. If you go around the valley around Clywren, which again, the heart of the Grange well, see, this is within Cwmtair of this bit anyway. There's the ruins of a longhouse. Okay, it's a long building divided into compartments. There's one on the banks of the Clywren, a smaller version. They don't have to be that big. That one would be, but that plan I showed of the one at Llaethdy and Radnorshire would be similar size to this actually, and the Llaethdy one was still standing in the 1930s. But you're looking at the stone foundations of a building is what you're looking at. That's the interesting thing, because what you have to remember then, the rest of the building was built of timber. Okay, that's another point I forgot to make. So we may, and there's one that's been eroded by the Clywren River. So what we may be looking at in this case is actually a building that is not that dissimilar to a platform, but because they're built on flat ground, what they've done is just created a stone foundation and then built a timber house on them even. That's possible as well. Okay? Now, the reason I'm saying this is possible is blah, 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 blah. None of these have ever been excavated. So I've spent nearly all my life looking at these, and I have no idea what they are. Genuinely, I can't tell you their dates. I'm speculating, reasoned guesses, and there is excavated evidence from other places that we can compare with, but we're not sure, But I'm giving you like my best guess in a way, which sounds a bit disappointing, but I'm being honest. So you've got those long houses which are multi-compartmented, 2 or 3 compartments. But then we've got these long huts, which are really interesting as well. Jen? No. Now, long hut is almost exactly the same I've just said with the long house. But it tends to be a single cell building, okay? A simpler building. And this is, even with the long house, this is maybe what we're looking at. Stone foundation, a wattled wall, a clay wall, timber frame, clay walling, and then just plenty of reeds and rushes in these hills to thatch it, with a simple chimney, because there's a chimney opening in the roof at one end. And we know from descriptions from the 18th century that you had a wattled hurdle to close the door. Skip that, sorry. No, don't skip that. I mentioned John Leyland came through the area in the 1530s. Now his evidence is really interesting because this is an eyewitness from the 16th century, just at the point of the dissolution of Strata Florida Abbey, okay? I'll go to the next shot, I think. So what John Leyland is really, really, really important for is he goes to Strata Florida, and his intention is to head north. I think he was going to Llangurig. He's basically sent by the king to suss out what's going on at the abbeys, value them so that the king can sell them off and despoil them wherever they have, I think. But he spends some time at Strata Florida. There is a guide who takes him up into the hills to show him the sights. And we've done it, we can follow his footsteps, okay? The first river beside Teifi that I passed over was Clywren, that is to say the Black Clare. Well, that's Clywren, now it's a bothy now, it was a farmstead until a generation or two ago. And there's the river. No great stream, but coming through crags. Well, John Leyland saw this, obviously, we're in the same spot, aren't we? The stream, no great stream coming through us. On the farther side of it, I saw 2 very poor cottages for summer dairies for cattle. Okay, now we're still in the monastic period. There's no dissolution yet. We're pretty, 99% confident. This is where he crossed that river. On the other side of it, there are 2 long huts. These are the remains of the 2 buildings that he saw. This is one of them. Okay, now. This is the really fascinating, the wonderful thing about his evidence. And hard by were 2 hillocks through which Clywren passeth, where they fable that a giant striding was wont to wash his hands, and that Arthur killed him. The dwellers say also that the giant was buried nearby and shew the place. I'd like to think that pool, that waterfall, is where by that 16th century legend, the herdsman had, this is the culture of the people who lived on the hills, is a wonderful thing. He talked to people who actually lived in those houses. And they believed that a giant washed his hands in this pool, you know, and it was buried nearby. And just up on the hill above is the very cairn that we sheltered from in the thunderstorm. There's a nice Bronze Age cairn. I do wonder, is that where they took John Leyland and they said this is where the giant's buried? It may be. So, you know, this is the amazing thing from an archaeological point of view. You're getting a bit of history coming in here. And this is near that pool. We've got more of these long huts, these simple single-celled structures. So now we're getting very confused because we've got these big medieval timber structures, but then we've got these little stony, poor little cottages, which Leyland tells us people were living in, yeah, in the medieval period, or very, very end of the medieval period. So, and that area around Clyrthy, those dots show us, I mean, the dark purple, the green dots are long huts. You know, there are houses and ancillary structures dotted all around that landscape. It's a very busy landscape, clearly, at the end of the medieval period, okay? So, you know, and wherever you go in the valleys, and now wherever Jenny's talking about the Bronze Age all being on the hilltops, now we're down in the valleys with shelter and water and good flat grazing ground, potentially, I suppose. We're getting long huts everywhere. I mean, that particular one is part of a group of about a dozen long huts. So again, you know, but stone-built buildings. Now, it's stone foundation buildings. Next, sorry. You know, this is on the Ceredigion side. You know, the remains of a long hut, possibly with an ancillary structure attached to it. Next shot. Now, so I'm throwing all this at you because this is what's thrown at us. This is what we're dealing with. We're trying to make sense of this, and without archaeological excavation, we're just looking at the bare bones of what's on the surface. It's really hard. But I'm going to take you like a step away from where people live now to think, well, why were they living there in the medieval period, during its monastic period? And Jenny alluded to it earlier. Stratford, Florida was a fairly unimportant place in the greater scheme of things, I suppose. But it didn't do bad for itself. It had a lot of uplands to work with. It controlled a lot of land, big estates. And the value of those estates, they had lead, was one thing. They made some use of that. But they had acres and acres and acres and acres of good upland pasture. So they had these massive pastoral farms. These granges were geared to producing food and producing wool. Sheep were a big thing for these monks. And hence, famously, King John awarded this abbey a special license to export this wool from Stratford, Florida, down the Towy Valley to the port of Carmarthen and on to Flanders and the continent, okay? That was by royal decree, because it was a huge factory. This isn't just some monks in the hills keeping a few goats. This is a massive industrial enterprise, really. They're maximising their profits, okay? Now, one of the things they were doing under the Havod-Hendra system we're talking about, you think about the nature of it, and this is something as a field archaeologist, it bothered me for years. The Havod means that people are up there for the summer months, and they've got mainly sheep in this instance, okay, rather than cattle. One thing they're doing is milking their sheep, and they're making cheese, and they're producing milk, and they're making butter. Right, so if you go up in the hills in the summer and you're making cheese and butter and milk, what do you do with it? How do you keep it fresh? What use is it to anyone other than yourself, what you're eating? But your job is to produce a surplus for the abbey and for the other community, the rest of the lowland community, okay? This stuff has to go off the mountain to where other people can use it as well. So what we've noticed over the years, where you find these platforms, where you find these long huts, where you find the long houses, not always, but quite often, you get these features, which are what we call sunken shelters, okay? And again, I think one's been excavated to no great result, but somewhere up in Clwyd, in northeast Wales, possibly. But they can be earthwork, they can be stone. But basically, they're cuts in the ground that will have a revetted wall. If you go to, is there another one? Yeah, and, you know, there's another one. Very odd things. They cut into the ground. So, you know, to cut a long story short, I think we've come to the conclusion these are sunken shelters. These are storage for perishable foods. You put new food stuff into the ground, put a sort of thatched roof over it, and it will keep things cool. And they tend to be near, they're not always, but they do tend to be in the streams. That's Hernaint Clyrwen, for instance. You can, that's more of an earthwork one. The interior is collapsed into a pile of stone. Now, these are really important little bits of detail. That it's not just where people lived. You've got to remember why they were there. And We believe this is the archaeology of that Grange economy is coming through, okay? So there are many of them in the hills of Olenydd, and you know, we haven't got time to go over half of them. But then there's another aspect of Hafod, the Hafod tradition. You're dealing with managing stock, whether it's sheep, cattle, goats, whatever it would be, geese, whatever you've got. You need to control your animals. At certain times of the year, as modern farmers know, you have to bring them together, whether it's to take them back to the lowlands for the winter, or it's to bring them in for whatever you do, shearing, slaughter, whatever it might be. Enclosures, you need to have stockades, you need to have places to bring your animals. So in the granges, what we find, in all these granges, including Penarth, which is the home grange, I think, we get these lovely earthwork enclosures, sometimes associated with platforms, I have to say. And again, I won't go into that in detail now. And this is where Jenny said earlier, the snow can help. You can just about see the curve of the bank with Jenny standing on it. That's the Towie Forest in the background, by the way. So we're not far from Strata Florida here. There's a really good example above Clydwen, just south of Clydwen Farm. A lovely stockade. There's a platform along, I think it's a platform, isn't it? Was it inside or outside? I can't remember. But there's certainly there was a building with it. So, and there's one Llynganon's in the background, a more rectangular enclosure. There's a platform just below it. So we would like to think that these are the places, during the monastic period, this is where they were gathering animals together. There's no other rational explanation for these things. And you go back to the Pantallyn site in the northeast of the Elan estate, that similar sort of idea of having enclosures. They have to have a function, don't they? They're not gardens, put it that way. They're something else.
Enclosures as well. They're both enclosures, but they are different because the small square one has got actually a ditch inside the bank.
Yeah.
Normally you just sort of expect it. The other one hasn't really got much of a ditch at all, but that one has got a ditch inside, which is
I will draw attention on that one, even though around the corners, just on the left-hand side, you can see the plough lines. That land's been ploughed, but we'll come to that before I finish. Go on to the next one then. So that's Pantallyn again. You can see Jenny, the very dark Jenny, there is the enclosure there. Just to the very left side there, that reed is actually a sunken shelter. It's one of these underground storage features again. So you've got to look at that as a little factory. You know, this is where they bring the animals, this is where they store the food. There are 4 or 5 houses there. There's a lot of activity going on around this site. I think we've seen that before. And this now, the Wye Valley in the distance here, this is going further south from Pantallyn. Look at that lovely enclosure. You can see it picked out by the late afternoon sun. Now Jenny you can see again, and I don't know if you can see it, but sort of there are 2 poles. There's one there and there's one there. I'm getting better at this now. The odd thing about the enclosure, it's got 3 sides, the 4th side's left open. And we stood there for a while thinking, gosh, why would you do that and leave the 4th side open? And then, this is one thing I will say, not only do we like to work in winter, we like to work till it's dark. We'll work until the sun goes down, because this is like happy hunting hour for field archaeologists, is the last couple of hours of daylight when there's a low shadow, because if you go to the next slide, you see what it produces. The mystery is solved. Jenny's now standing next to the outline of a long hut. Can you see it just there? Can you see the rectangular building foundation? So that 3-sided enclosure was actually a proper enclosure. The house completed the 4th side. So one of those sort of stone foundation, I would imagine, with wood and mud walls and a thatched roof. Look in the background though. This is, I'm going to get there on that slope opposite. See the ploughing again? These broad plough, that lazy bed sort of cultivation almost there. But it's been cultivated, and that's going to lead us to a slightly, towards the end of this talk, and a slightly complicated issue. The issue of farming, agriculture, not just pastoral farming, but actual agriculture in terms of agrarian activity, because that's up there. We can see that at some point in the past, they've been ploughing on a lot of these hills. Why? Now, we have come across examples where it was the Second World War and they were planting potatoes to increase the amount of potatoes in the parish. But many of you will know of when you go up the Elan Valley, Pont o'r Elan, just go head up on the Cymystwyth Road. There's a little farm you see off to the side, to the left, Aberglanherin Farm. Opposite that is this bank, Esgyrty, and you can see these lumps on Esgyrty. There's one there, there's another one there, there are several others dotted around. They're rabbit warrens, okay? It's a rabbit farm. Now, Is it a monastic rabbit farm? That's possible. It may, and here's another view of it. And this is a wonderful thing that we came across just down on the road here. Well, maybe there actually, sorry, there. There's the remains of a massive earthwork platform, but the combustion has gone straight through the middle of it. So when they built that road, whenever that was, that house was already long forgotten. They just drove the road straight through it. So the two ends of the house survived, but the road goes to the middle. And then below it, there's two large mounds. Now, if you read medieval information about rabbit farms, the warrener lived in a house on the warren, and always kept these mounds. These are artificial rabbit warrens, these big mounds, okay, where the rabbits were forced to live because they didn't want to come. They brought them from France. The Normans brought them. The rabbits are not native. They forced them to live on these miserable hills. But the warrener always had a compound next to his house where the breeding does were kept separate from the bucks. So you've got a medieval rabbit farm just there, right next to the roadside in Pontarlier. Fantastic. I'd love to think that's a monastic farm. Weird thing about it, the whole hill, as you can see this side, has been ploughed. It's been unploughed with oxen, I would think. It's got that strange S-shaped sort of pattern to the plough lines. Rabbits and farming and growing cereal crops don't really mix, do they? So chicken and egg, did they plough it first or did they have rabbits there first? We can't answer that question at the minute. We can't determine it from the field evidence. But now we now may be seeing things that are post-monastic. Maybe you could be looking at a medieval rabbit farm, and then later on that land's been ploughed. As 17th century, there's more land, more population, pressure on the hills to produce crops and so forth. And very briefly, as I come to an end now, we're going to just touch on one or two other little things. What we've got to differentiate here is all this stuff I'm saying about platforms and longhouses and long huts and sunken shelters and all that is to break that away from the cottages and farms that we see in the hills now that we're kind of more familiar with. This is an example of a shepherd's cottage that we know is 18th, 19th century. This is later, okay? This was lived in up until the late 1900s, 1800s. It's a cottage and an outbuilding. If you go to the next one, there's another example which is near the Cwmystwyth Ryder Road again, Trehesclog Bank, Trehesclog. These belong to the Llues tradition. It's a bit of a murky subject. The Hafod-Hendra system was outlawed by the Acts of Union because Welsh law was abolished, so that whole model was wiped away. In the Welsh uplands, what replaced it was a move to increased shepherding, which wasn't such a big change for the Strata Florida Granges because the sheep was their thing anyway. But then you get the Llues system, okay? The Llues system, and you'll see Llues as a place name. That's purely to do with shepherding, and this isn't Hafods where they're there for the summer months. In the Llues, the shepherd was there all year round. He was on the hills with the sheep all year round. So Llues Trehesclog is the ruins of it are there. The enclosure behind it would have been a garden for growing potatoes. Okay, it's not for, don't ask me how I know this, I just do. Because sometimes you'll see the lazy bed, the garden, the remains of the garden within that enclosure. A Llues will often have a patch where they grew root vegetables. So we kind of got to extract these different strands from each other to try to start making sense of it all. Now I'm coming to a close. These they don't make any sense, right? They're just random maps from different surveys we've done. I just want to show with that the dots on those maps, and there's like the Cwmystwyth side is the one over there. That's the northwestern bit of the Elan estate. This is the bit we redid in 2022, 23, the resurvey area. All those dots are settlement sites. I just want you to get this impression that those hills are full of evidence of settlement, and I'm in this instance medieval or later settlement. Okay. It's not always possible to say which is later, but one suspects that a large proportion of that is medieval settlement. So I think we were going to have a question on this, and we'll come to it later, I'm sure. But this is such an important thing for us as field archaeologists to get across to people. When people go and look at hills like the Olennydd Hills or the Brecon Beacons, they see, oh, that's how nature intended it to be. No, it didn't. That's what mankind has done to it. It's a false, a fake landscape. It's been created like that by centuries and centuries of hard work from all sorts of herdsmen and farmers and all sorts of people who've made it what it is now. And it's a human landscape, and it's packed with the archaeology that they've left behind. And like I said, sadly for people of our generation, having spent most of our adult lives trundling around these hills, we're only just starting to get to grips with it, because only now can we see that. It's only literally this last 24 hours it's dawned on me, yeah, we've got all these dots on the whole maps for the whole area now. We can actually see it all, which we've only ever seen bits of it. So the process of synthesizing all that information and making sense of it is only just beginning. And that's the challenge. That's like a challenge possibly for another generation, for all I know. I don't know. I think there may be one more slide. I want to go back to this to finish at Cwm Ffwrn, because this is how significant Cwm Ffwrn is, believe it or not, and how much respect we have for the project you're doing there. All those dots that I'm showing you in Elenydd, we have no archaeological excavation going on at all and no prospect of it. Okay? Cwm Ffwrn, you were actually excavating a medieval platform. If we get anything out of this, a piece of pottery, a bit of radiocarbon date, it'll be a significant development. It'll tell us something important. And you really, and this is, I think, where we want to finish, is when we cross from Elenydd into Abbey Cwm here, they're running the same economy. Right? We should be seeing the same things. We should be seeing the platforms, the long houses, the long huts, the enclosures, all these things. We should be seeing them. And I think Cwm Ffwrn we are seeing one. We haven't made sense of it yet, but there's no other explanation for that. It's a textbook platform, absolutely beautiful. You can see it in its all its glory. Even the reeds around the sides, where the water drains off, very often platforms have these drainage gullies to keep water off the platform. That's a common thing. This has got it all at Cwm Ffwrn. It's such, you know, this is a really important site. So we look forward to getting back to it. I think there's one more photograph. It's a dark photograph. We had a walk up there with a few of you one day at the very start of our engagement with you. And we noticed Jenny is there, standing in there, and she's standing on a lovely platform. And again, we see them because we're so attuned to having been up in the hills so long, and you know, and you can walk past them, you don't notice them. That one isn't cut so end on into the slope; it's cut along the slope, and which can happen. They can be diagonal to the slope. They can do them all sorts of different ways. So we can see in that Abbey Cwm here, the landscape around Abbey Cwm here, the same sorts of things are happening again. And you know, I think you've already got records of quite a few of them actually. I'm sure you have. You know, it's not a blank canvas in this case. But there's work to be done in all these monastic granges to start making sense. What are the common features? How do we make sense of all this? Because it is hard. And I know it's hard in Abbey Cwm here because you've got those later farmsteads, later cottages, all these other things that come in. You know, so there we go. So I don't know if that helps any of you. I don't know if it's interesting to any of you, but it interests us and it keeps us busy and out of trouble. And we're very grateful for the opportunity to come and talk to you and process our thoughts, and we thank you. And if there are any questions, I'm sure we'll be happy to answer them. Thank you very much.